At dawn on 2nd September 1898, near Omdurman on the Nile beside Khartoum, two armies met in a battle that reshaped Sudan and the wider imperial world. It still matters because it marked the violent end of the Mahdist state and the start of a new colonial order. In the years before the battle, Sudan had been transformed by revolt, religious zeal, famine, and war. The Mahdist movement had overthrown earlier rule, while Britain and Egypt prepared to reassert control along the Nile. The conflict was not only local, it drew in imperial strategy, control of the Nile corridor, and the fear that instability in Sudan could threaten Egypt and the route to the Red Sea and beyond. On one side stood the Mahdist forces, inspired by faith, recent victories, and the defense of their state. On the other stood the Anglo-Egyptian army, disciplined, heavily supplied, and confident in modern firepower. The leaders carried different burdens. The Mahdist command had to preserve momentum and legitimacy, while the Anglo-Egyptian commanders faced political pressure to win quickly and avoid another costly setback in Sudan. The armies themselves were unevenly matched in technology and organization. The Anglo-Egyptian force relied on rifles, artillery, machine guns, rail support, and river supply, while the Mahdist fighters depended on numbers, mobility, and determination. Morale on both sides was intense but different in kind. Many Mahdist fighters believed they were defending a sacred cause, while many Anglo-Egyptian soldiers saw themselves as part of a methodical campaign to finish a long war. The route to Omdurman mattered as much as the battle itself. The Anglo-Egyptian army advanced along the Nile with steamers, rail links, and supply lines, turning geography into an advantage. Beyond the river, the plain opened into hard, exposed ground. That openness would favor firepower, but it also left commanders with little room to hide mistakes once the fighting began. The battlefield lay under a harsh Sudanese sky. Heat, glare, dust, and dry wind shaped what soldiers could see, how they moved, and how long they could endure the day. The Anglo-Egyptian plan depended on holding formation and using disciplined fire to break repeated attacks. The Mahdist plan depended on speed, mass, and the hope that courage could close the distance. At the opening phase, the battlefield filled with movement and smoke. Distant volleys and artillery fire began to shape the day before most viewers on the ground could understand the full pattern. The first attacks tested the defenders and revealed the power of concentration. The Anglo-Egyptian line held together, while the attacking force met a wall of disciplined fire across open ground. The pressure point came where the terrain and timing made movement difficult. Units had to react quickly, and every shift in position risked exposing a flank or creating a gap in the line. Some Mahdist groups pressed forward with extraordinary determination, but the open ground offered little protection. The battle became a contest between momentum and sustained fire, and momentum began to fail. The decisive movement came when the Anglo-Egyptian command shifted from defense to advance. Once the line moved forward in order, the battle's balance changed rapidly and irreversibly. From a distance, the collapse looked sudden. In reality, it was the result of exhaustion, firepower, disrupted coordination, and the difficulty of sustaining a frontal assault against prepared positions. By late morning, the field had turned from an organized clash into a series of retreats and pursuits. The outcome was no longer in doubt, even as scattered fighting continued across the plain. The immediate aftermath was a landscape of exhaustion and silence. Survivors regrouped, tended to the wounded, and tried to understand how a single day had ended an entire military balance. Omdurman also opened the way for the reconquest of Sudan. Within a short time, imperial administration expanded, and the region entered a new political era under Anglo-Egyptian control. For Sudanese people, the change was not simply military. It meant altered authority, new taxation and administration, and the long shadow of outside rule over local life and memory. In the years that followed, Britain and Egypt consolidated their position along the Nile. Railways, garrisons, and bureaucracy followed the victory, tying the battle to a larger imperial system. The battle also became a symbol in military history. It is often studied for the contrast between massed infantry attacks and modern firepower, and for the role of logistics in victory. historians still qualify the story of total technological superiority. Firepower mattered greatly, but terrain, command decisions, morale, and the limits of each army all shaped the result. Some accounts also debate the exact balance between planning and improvisation. The battle was not a simple machine-like victory, it was a fast-moving encounter with uncertainty on both sides. The human cost remains important even when described cautiously. Thousands were involved, and the scale of the fighting left deep consequences for families, communities, and the political future of Sudan. The battle's memory has shifted over time. In some narratives, it appears as imperial triumph, while in others it stands as a reminder of Sudanese resistance and the costs of conquest. Today, the ground near Omdurman is part of a living city and a wider historical landscape. The battlefield is no longer isolated, but traces of the old plain can still be sensed in the terrain. The river still anchors the region, just as it did in 1898. Modern traffic, settlement, and changing land use now surround places once crossed by armies and supply columns. Standing on the plain today, it is easier to see why commanders cared so much about visibility and movement. The landscape still feels open, bright, and unforgiving. The battle endures because it sits at the meeting point of empire. Faith, strategy, and memory. It was decisive, but not simple, and its consequences reached far beyond one morning. For historians, Omdurman remains a case study in how modern armies fought colonial wars at the end of the 19th century. For Sudanese history, it remains a turning point that still invites careful remembrance. The battle did not erase the past that came before it. Instead, it layered a new political order over older struggles, leaving historians to trace both continuity and rupture. Its story is best understood through scale: the river, the open ground, the supply lines, the formations, and the speed with which the day changed. Those elements made Omdurman decisive. Even now, the battle asks viewers to think about power and consequence without reducing either side to a caricature. History here is about choices, pressures, and the limits of control. Near Khartoum, the land still holds the memory of that September morning. Omdurman remains a reminder that battles can end empires, but they also leave questions that outlast victory.